بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال إبراهيم رب اجعل هذا البلد آمنا واجنبني وبني أن نعبد الأصنام. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. At the forefront of the priorities of the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not only establishing conscious, God-fearing communities, but it goes without saying that they also strive to establish God consciousness within their own inner circles, their companions, their relatives, and their family members. Notice that when Ibrahim, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes him in the Quran as saying, requesting, he says, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا. He prays for the security of the sanctuary of the city of Mecca. وَاجْنُبْنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَن نَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ. Do not allow us, our offspring, the generations to come, to worship things which are not worthy of worship. Asnam being an example, the idols. You find that, for instance, the Prophet Yaqub, he speaks to his sons, he addresses his sons. يَا بَنِيَّ اذْهَبُوا وَتَحَسَّسُوا مِنْ يُوسُفَ وَأَخِيهِ وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ يَا بَنِيَّ ادْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ لَا تَدْخُلُوا مِنْ بَابٍ وَاحِدٍ وَادْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ. Luqman, for instance, speaks to his son. وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. So that there was always a conversation, there was always a relationship between the messengers and their sons, or their fathers, or their family members. Ibrahim, not only did he address his sons, but he also addressed his uncle, Azar. And we find that the success of the prophets, of the messengers, in one way or another was related to the participation or the involvement of their closest kin, their companions. For instance, when we speak about the success of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, according to the account of the Prophet himself, he says, the success of the religion of Islam is based upon two things. The wealth of whom? The wealth of Khadija, and the sword of whom? Ali ibn Abi Talib. His wife, Khadija, and his cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib. By his own account, they contributed to the success of the rise of the message of Islam. And so it goes without saying that as conscious parents and as conscious families, one of our direct responsibilities is establishing not only ourselves, not only our communities, but most importantly, offspring who are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not necessarily religious or devout. One who is conscious is enough. You don't have to be devout, you don't have to be necessarily religious, but being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or else, if we do not, we risk the religion of Islam becoming, like other religions, a mere cultural accessory and not a way of life as it is supposed to be. And there is much reward in establishing offspring who are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says in the Quran, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ بِإِيمَانٍ أَلْحَقْنَا بِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ. Those who have iman and those who follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one consequence or one result of that is that we will allow their offspring to also join them in goodness, in iman, in good faith and in good health. Likewise, we are asked about our athar, our offspring. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى وَنَكْتُبُ مَا قَدَّمُوا وَآثَارَهُم وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. مَا قَدَّمُوا, what they have given forward, their good deeds, وَآثَارَهُم, their athar, what they left behind, meaning their offspring, their children, the generations which came after this. So it goes without saying that it is the responsibility of every God-conscious person to establish and protect the well-being of not only himself, his community, his friends, but number one, who is at the forefront? The offspring, the family members. And in order to do this, we must be mindful of a few things. Number one, we must understand the psychology of our children. And there are two things which directly affect the psychology of children. Number one is the sense of belonging, and number two is the need for attention. Children have to have a sense of belonging. One problem that exists, this is outside of the family, one problem that exists in communities in general is that when it comes to Islamic centers, when it comes to masajid, mosques, children do not feel a sense of belonging. Why? Because they come to the center and they hear a language which they cannot understand. Correct? And this is why it's important to hold these gatherings in the English language or any language which the children themselves understand. Because when they come here and they do not understand the language, then there's no sense of belonging. It's easy for them to abandon it and seek other places which will be more than happy to accept them with open arms. So sense of belonging. There has to be a sense of belonging. There has to be a sense of security within the home. If the child does not feel safe and secure at home, he's not going to feel safe and secure anywhere. Not at the YMCA, not at the gym, not at his friend's house, not at the school. The home has to be a safe haven, a place where he feels secure, he or she feels secure, a sense of belonging. And this is why one very important issue is child abuse. And I'm not only speaking of physical abuse. Sometimes it's more general than that. Sometimes it's verbal abuse. And sometimes, unfortunately, the abuse, the source of that abuse, it's not at school. The child is not being bullied at school. Nor is he being bullied at his friend's house. He's being bullied where? At home. Sometimes, unfortunately, the source of neglect, the source of abuse comes within the home. From the parents, sometimes not from the parents, from an older sibling, from an uncle, from a cousin, from a close relative. I'm not saying that we should be suspicious of our family members, but we should not rule this out. We should not presume that just because it is a house, and just because we own this house, and just because things look like they are okay, then that's it. No, we should be mindful of these things. Abuse should not exist within the home. Neither physical abuse, nor what? Any other kinds of abuse, whether it is verbal abuse, and sometimes the verbal abuse is worse than the physical abuse. When a child is constantly, and this happens even in Muslim communities, unfortunately, some parents, they cannot hold their tongue when it comes to their children. They curse at the child like the child is his enemy. It happens. And what do you expect happens with the child after that? Do you expect them to build a strong character and a strong personality and be able to face the challenges and the problems of the world? When they cannot find sanctuary at home, how are they going to build their personality? How are they going to build their character? Number one. And number two, this is something which is very important as well. And this contributes to a sense of belonging in the home, is responsibility. Just because a child, no like-minded child says, Mom and Dad, I'm bored, I want chores. None of them. Because they have today their PlayStation, and they have the TV, and they have the friends. And if you sit them on the PlayStation, sometimes they'll sit for 12 hours, 18 hours. I read a report that a child had died one day because he sat in front of his Xbox for something like 18 hours without food or drink. So they'll continue and they'll continue and they'll continue and they don't get bored. They don't ask for chores, but to make them feel a sense of belonging, there has to be responsibility. The best way to establish is through chores. Now I'm going to make a general poll. How many of us do chores at home? By a show of hands. Willingly. How many of you boys, how many of you wash the dishes? You're not a true man until you wash the dishes. How many of us help our mothers with cooking, not with the cooking, with cleaning, with laundry, with things like this? Show of hands. Okay, alhamdulillah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This is very important. This gives us a sense of belonging. When the child, even at the age of 2 or 3 or 4, is given chores or is given some sort of responsibility, they feel a sense of belonging. When they feel a sense of belonging, they feel a sense of security. So one way to raise good children is to give them chores or to give them some sort of responsibility. Because children at this age are very delicate. It's very, very important that we work on them from the first few years. The Jesuits, are you familiar with the Jesuits? The Jesuits, they say that give us a child and we will give him back to you when he is 7 years old. And we will give you a man. By the age of 7, they produce a man out of a child. And this is why Islam tells us, that when it comes to raising children, child rearing should not be 2 stages. It should be 3 stages, right? From the time that they are born till the time that they are 7 years old, the hadith says that allow them to roam freely. Of course, not to do that which is haram, but to roam freely. Do not be very strict with them. From age 7 to age 14, give them responsibility. Make sure they do their obligations, their wajibat. And from age 14 to age 21, what? Be strict with them. Make sure that they are doing their obligations. Here, what happens? The child, he's a baby until the age 18. Until 18 years old, he's a baby. And then the day that he becomes 18, he jumps into adulthood overnight. And this is why children, young adults, here, they have problems when it comes to managing their time, when it comes to managing their finances, when it comes to managing their education, when it comes to managing their general lifestyle. Why? Because they are treated like a child by law and inside the house until the age of 18. And then all of a sudden they're what? They're an adult and they have to leave the home and they have to do this and that. And they have to take care of themselves. Right? It's a very delicate age. And this is why we should make sure that the child, number one, has a sense of belonging through security and through responsibilities. Number two, the child has a need for attention. And before saying this, I will state one fact. What is the most common phrase which is said today in the world? It's 3 words. Does anyone have a clue? The most common phrase which is used. Any newlyweds? Where are the newlyweds? Newlyweds say this a lot. It begins with I and it ends with you. Not I hate you. The most commonly used phrase in the world today is I love you. I love you. Love is everywhere. Love is in the air, correct? And from the message of Ashura, we learn love because the members of the household of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, all of them manifested love, including Abu Fadl al-Abbas, the man who we commemorate today. A child needs to be told, I love you. A child needs to also be felt as though he is loved. Children beg for attention. Studies say that children would rather be noticed as misbehaving children than be ignored as good children. And that's why you notice that when a child is not given due attention, what does he do? He begins to jump around. He begins to hit his siblings. He begins to misbehave. When he is not given attention, when he is not praised when he deserves praise, when he is not loved when he deserves love, correct? What happens? He begins to misbehave because he would rather be noticed as a misbehaving child than be ignored as what? As a well-behaved child. So children need attention. Just because a parent works from 9 to 5 does not mean that, khalas, that's it, there's no moral responsibility towards the children anymore. And just because the child is at school and being educated from 8 to 2 or from 8 to 3, that means that that's it, that he's getting the attention that he wants. The attention that a child receives from his parents can never be replaced. Not by his teacher, not by his friend, not by his sibling, nowhere. The source of love is the home. And this is why, when we take the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Their home was the source of love. Although they didn't have many materials, materialistically speaking, they did not have much. In fact, they had the bare bones minimum. Even their food was minimum. Even their drink was minimum. Even their clothing was minimum. The space that they had in their home was minimum. But their home was a center of love. It was a center of attention. And this is what established the personality of people like Al-Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, people like Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, people like Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, raised in the home of Amir al-Mu'mineen and al-Banin, a place which was full of love. Zainab alayhi salam was raised in a home which was full of love, which was full of attention. Not one day went where Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam did not communicate with his children, did not show his children that he loved them. So number one is a sense of belonging. Children have to have a sense of belonging in the home. And number two, there has to be attention. Pay attention. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is important. This concerns you. Inshallah, once you become older, you'll be teaching your children the same as well. Please come forward again. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Stand up and come forward. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. الثاني على حب الحسن والحسين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Stand up in the back and come forward. الثالثة على حب فاطمة الزهراء بأعلى أصواتكم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. There are rules of engagement when it comes to speaking to family members, when it comes to speaking to children. Imam Ali alayhi salam says the following hadith. Pay attention close. This is very relevant to our times. Imam Ali alayhi salam says that do not implement the same standards with your children that were implemented on you. Do not treat your children in the same manner that you were treated. For they were created for a time which is different than your time. Imagine, Imam Ali alayhi salam says this 1400 years ago. Now when the Imam is saying that your children are of a different generation, that they are of a different mentality, so treat them not that the way that you would treat yourselves or the way that you were treated, because they were created for a different time. They have a different mentality. Their emotions are different. Imam Ali alayhi salam says this 1400 years ago. And in a matter of 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, the passing of one generation, there weren't technological advancements. How many technological advancements were there? None. Practically none. No medical, no scientific advancements. But Imam Ali alayhi salam says this 1400 years ago. In the same way that he says this, we should apply this to our lives right now. Do not treat your children or raise your children in the exact same way that you were raised. Understand their psychology and understand that they have a completely different mentality. I'll give you an example of how children have different mentality. This question is for the parents. When you speak to your children, how many of us speak to our children in our mother tongue, Arabic or Urdu or Farsi, when we are trying to teach them something? How many? You speak to them generally in their own language. Okay, since there are more children, I'll ask. How many of you, do your parents speak to you in their native language? Right? When the child does not understand, what happens? You switch your language, correct? You speak to them in English. This is how it was with me. My parents would speak to me in Arabic. If I didn't understand, they would switch to English. That's the only time where we would hear English in the house. What does this tell you? That there's a completely different mentality. With differences of language, there's difference of mentality. With differences of culture, there's differences of mentality. If your child is raised in a different atmosphere, Imam Ali is saying if he is raised in the same atmosphere, if he is raised in the same city, if he is raised in the same home, don't apply the same standards. If you come from a different country, then how should we engage with our children? Islam teaches us exactly how to engage with our children. Number one, there has to be lines of communication. Understand this, that the prisons here are not filled with young men whose fathers used to talk to them on a daily basis and tell them, Baba, do this and do not do this and make this career choice and take this job and don't take this job. Our prisons are filled with young men, and in some cases young women, whose fathers were not involved in their lives at all. And if they were there, they were not there. Meaning they were physically there, but mentally they were not there. There was no admonishment. There has to be communication. There has to be communication. Even if you feel you get to a point where you've reached the end of the road, just establishing communication, your children will appreciate it. Just establishing communication, your parents will appreciate it. Sometimes our parents want to hear it from us. And this is very important. I want you all to pay attention. When it comes to communication, one of the biggest barriers which stands in front of communication today is what? All of you have one in your pockets right now. Technology. Technology is smart, but it is creating dumb people, unfortunately. And what is the first thing that you do with technology when you come home? I see this many times, even with I'll start with myself. My younger siblings, they do this as well. You come home and the first thing is you plug the headphones into the iPad or the iPod or whatever device that you have and you're gone. He's gone. 3-4 hours, he's gone completely until it runs out of charge. Brothers, sisters, this is not good. It may be funny right now, but our children are growing not knowing how to speak. Why? Why? Why don't they know how to speak? Because all of their speech is done through what? Through text messaging, and through tweeting, and through statusing. I came across a very interesting article, an interesting piece. A few years ago, a woman purchased a brand new iPhone for her son, 13 years old, for Christmas. But it wasn't unconditional like today when we purchase for our children. You purchase it and that's it, it's his. She wrote down a list of points, 18 points, which he has to adhere by in order to receive this Christmas present. And it was pretty interesting. She said, number one, this iPhone belongs to me. You're only borrowing it. I purchased it with my money. Once you become old enough and you can purchase with your own money, the iPhone, it's mine, it belongs to me. Number two, I'll know the password at all times. Number three, that the iPhone turns off at 7:30 p.m. on weekdays and at 9 p.m. on weekends. It turns back on the next morning at 7:30 a.m. You don't need your iPhone at night. How many of us, when we go to sleep, how many of us, when we go to sleep, we have the phone like this for an hour? It's like this, or it's on the side. And then it falls on your face, correct? We're losing sleep over these devices. And then later on, you realize that what I did last night for 1 hour, I could have totally avoided. I didn't need to see that video. I didn't need to read this tweet or this status. None of these devices can make up for having a real conversation. She goes on, she continues, she says some important things. She says you don't need to take 1 billion pictures of what you do. Not everything needs to be documented. The best memory chip is stored where? Not in your phone, it's in your brain. If your phone can hold 16 gigabytes or 32 or 64, your brain can potentially hold, if you use it properly, billions of gigabytes. And the best memory that you can have is where? The memory which is here. You're going to enjoy your experiences more if you can follow them with your brain and not depend on a device. She says something which is very important. She says, she's telling her son, never ever text something, never write an email, never send a message, write something that you would not say to that person if you saw him in front of you, right? Because you're standing behind this device, sometimes you become deceptive. It's a barrier, and you begin to become deceptive, right? Sometimes you say something through a text message, which if you saw that person in front of you, you would not say. How many of us say LOL and we're really not laughing out loud? Huh? How many of us say LMAO and we're not laughing ourselves off? Huh? Really? How many of us say ROFL? I've never seen a person roll on the floor and laugh. Never in my life. And how many times, the more O's that you add, the higher your sound is. What is this? It's being deceptive. Would you really laugh out loud if this person, sometimes you're grinning, you're frowning when you say LOL. It's just something to say, correct? There's nothing wrong with it. It's okay, if you say it once, if you say it twice. But when that becomes your entire terminology, it's not safe. It's not good for you to build your communication skills off of what? Off of texting. An emoticon, a smiley face, as cute as it is, it does not replace a face. It does not replace a smiling face. When you see someone smiling, or when you see somebody crying, that has an effect on you. Personally, it has an effect on you. And it's a good effect. It's good to see people laughing and smiling and crying. This builds your personality. You may not believe it right now, but it is going to build your personality. When you go tomorrow for a job interview and you're writing your resume, one of the things that they want you to have is good communication skills. When they ask you, where did you learn your communication skills? Are you going to say through texting? Are you going to be texting your boss? Are you going to be texting the person sitting next to you? No. So communication, one of the things which stands as a barrier when it comes to communicating with our fathers, when it comes to communicating with our mothers, with our children, are these devices. Please, brothers and sisters, this is very, very important. Let us limit the amount of time that we spend on our devices. If we don't know how to use them properly, do not put them in the wrong hands. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So number one is communication. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about man, عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ, that He taught him how to articulate himself. Articulate yourself is not through text messages, bayan, being able to speak for yourself, being able to reflect what is really on the inside. None of this can come through chatting. None of this can come through text messaging. Also a part of this is being a good listener. You have to be a good listener in order to be a good speaker. You will not be able to speak properly if you don't know how to listen. Sometimes a person does not want you to talk to them. You will face challenges in your life. You will have to provide moral support for your family members, for your spouses, for your friends. That does not entail that you know how to talk. Sometimes you have to just zip it. Just be quiet and be able to listen. Sometimes just lending an ear to a believer is enough. That's enough moral support. So number one is communication. There has to be lines of communication between the parents and the children at whatever cost. At whatever cost. Don't go to your friend's house if you have not spoken to your parents. Some people, some kids, some children, they sit and they speak to their friends for hours and hours and hours on end, but they don't say a single word to their parents when they come home. When they come in, they don't know how to say the simplest of things. Salamu alaikum. How many of us, show of hands, when we come home, we say salam, not hello. Salamu alaikum to our parents. Raise your hand. How many of us, I'm going to take this a step further. How many of us embrace our parents when we see them? Hug them or kiss them? On a daily basis. On a daily basis. Okay, on a weekly basis. Huh? On a yearly basis. Brothers and sisters, this is important. When you come home to your parents, the first thing that you do is Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Not salam, not hey, not hi. This is not the akhlaq that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam taught us. Say Assalamu alaikum. After that, if you want to say, hey, how are you doing? That's fine. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You go to your parents. You ask them, do you have any chores for me to do? Do you have any responsibilities for me that you want me to take care of? You have to be an effective communicator. You have to be an effective speaker. You have to be an effective listener if you want to grow up as effective, influential people. Number two, what needs to exist within the household is encouragement. And encouragement is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to our prophets. حَتَّى إِذَا اسْتَيْأَسَ الرُّسُلُ وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ قَدْ كُذِبُوا جَاءَهُمْ نَصْرُنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about some prophets in Surah Yusuf, that they preach to their people, and they preach for years sometimes, and for decades, and for centuries. Did not Nuh preach to his people for centuries? and they turned away from him? He says some of our rusul, some of our messengers, they get to a point where they believe that's it. They have no job anymore, that their whole life is a lie. حتى استيأس الرسل. Stayas means yes, from hopelessness. They have hopelessness not in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in their people. Because the messengers of Allah never have hopelessness in Allah. In their people. That's it. We are done with these people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? جَاءَهُمْ نَصْرُنَا. That He encourages them. Likewise, if we want to build communities and families which are successful, there has to be encouragement. There are children whose talents cannot be seen unless they are encouraged. And the first place that encouragement must exist is within the household. That is number 2. Number 3, there has to be shared and harmonious decision making. A family is not a military setting, it is a social setting. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he would speak to his children. And Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, he would speak to his children. Even on the way to Karbala, the Imam, he turns to his son Ali al-Akbar. He says, what is your opinion on this journey that we are taking right now? What does he say? What does Ali al-Akbar answer? He says, أَوَلَسْنَا عَلَى الْحَقِّ? Are we not on the path of truth? The Imam is consulting his son. He says, are we not on the path of truth? قَالَ بَلَى, yes, we are on the path of truth. He said, إِذَنْ لَا نُبَالِي وَقَعَ الْمَوْتُ عَلَيْنَا أَمْ وَقَعْنَا عَلَى الْمَوْتِ. Then we should not care if we are on the path of truth. If death falls upon us or we fall upon death. Consultation between the father and the son. So number 3 is encouragement. And number 4, and this is the most important, fulfilling your promises. As a son or a daughter, you have to fulfill your promises towards your parents. And this is a priority. Before your parents make promises to you, you have to make promises towards your parents. Before your parents fulfill their promises to you, you have to fulfill your promises towards your parents. It has to come from you before it comes from them. However, being truthful and following through with your promises is also the way of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Our 7th Imam, Al-Imam Musa al-Kawthar alayhi salam, says that if you promise your family something, if you promise your children something, then follow through with that promise. You may think that it is insignificant because your child does not understand. But he continues to say, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not angered for anyone in the same fashion that He is angered for women and children. So if you make a promise to them, fulfill that promise. And your children see you as their sustainers and as their role models. If you cannot fulfill a promise to your child, how do you expect your child in 30, 40, 50, 60 years to fulfill a promise with their child? And this is why when the Quran describes to us the prophets, and when it describes to us Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. It describes the men of God, the believers, as what? صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. They follow through with their promises. And follow through with their promises does not mean that if they make a promise that they are truthful to that. It's a much more general meaning. That what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for them in this life, they hold true to it. If they make contracts, they hold true to it. If they make promises, they hold true to it. And in general, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requests from them something, that they follow through with their promises. And this was the kind of environment which was found in the homes of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, which built personalities such as Ali al-Akbar and Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. People who had inherited truthfulness from their fathers and their fathers and their grandfathers and their ancestors. في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. In homes where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for His name to be remembered. In homes where the Quran was constantly recited. In homes where the Quran itself was revealed. This was the kind of atmosphere. When we ask, why was Ali al-Akbar a champion? Why was Al-Qasim a champion? Why was Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas a champion? Why did they forsake the beauty of this world in order to reach the beauty of the next world? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say these things about them? مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. It all comes back to the environment which was placed for it. And spearheading that campaign of creating that proper environment were the parents. Parents like Imam Ali alayhi salam, Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, al-Baneen. These were the people who created champions and the way that they lived their everyday lives. And this is why when Imam Ali alayhi salam sought to remarry after the death of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, he went first to his brother Aqil. And his brother Aqil was a man who knew genealogy. He knew the families, he knew the tribes. He knew the tribes of Quraysh and the tribes of Hijaz. He knew which person came from which family. So when he turns to his brother Aqil, he tells him, Ya Aqil, I have a special request from you. I want to remarry, but I want you to find me a woman from a family which are known for their bravery, their courage, and their nobility. Because I have a special task from this woman. I want her to bear me children who will be able to defend my son Hussein on the day of Ashura, in the lands of Karbala. So he goes and finds for him Fatima, also known as al-Baneen. When she came to the home of Imam Ali alayhi salam, every time the name Fatima was mentioned in front of Imam Ali, his tears would be drawn. Because he would remember Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. And it is for this reason that he bestowed upon her the name al-Baneen, the mother of the boys, the mother of the sons, the 4 sons who gave their life in defending their brother and their master, Sayyid al-Shuhada Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. On the night of Ashura, the night before the day of Ashura, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam is standing. He is protecting the woman of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the granddaughters of Rasulullah. He is standing with the standard, the flag. He is the flag bearer. When from the tent emerges his sister Zainab alayhi salam, the one who had came to Karbala under his protection. Some say that as long as Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam was present, that even the shadow of Zainab alayhi salam was not witnessed. Let alone her figure, let alone her in front of men. Her shadow even was not witnessed by anybody. This is how protective he was of his sisters and the woman of his family. She comes to him, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. They used to refer to him as Qamar Bani Hashim, the moon of Bani Hashim, because of the way that his face would illuminate in the dark night, the way that a moon illuminates in the dark night. Qamar Bani Hashim. She comes to him and she reveals to him the story. She says, Do you know the story of your mother, al-Baneen? Do you know why my father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, chose your mother? He chose her because she came from a family of bravery and courage and sacrifice and nobility. And you were not created out of coincidence. You were created for this very day. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, a man who from his first days when he was a child, his mother al-Baneen said, you will never address your brother al-Hussein by his name, never. You will call him Sayyidi, my master. And you will only call him by Sayyidi. And he went his entire life, 33 years, until the day of Ashura, referring to his brother as Sayyidi Abu Abdullah. How many of us respect our older siblings when we speak to them? How many of us, some I see, they do not even refer to their older siblings by their name. They refer to him by a profanity or by a nickname. This man used to refer to him. And don't think that just because your older sibling is only a few years older than you, you don't need to respect him. There's another sibling which will come after you. There's a child that will come after you. You want to be respected by someone who is younger than you? Respect your elders. Even if he is a year or 6 months older than you. Very important. She tells him, do not refer to him by his name. You have no right to do it. It is haram upon you to do so. And he goes his entire life referring to his brother as Sayyidi Abu Abdullah, my master. I am your slave. I am your servant. The Imam says, when he mentions Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, his greatness, his glory, he says that my uncle Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas has a place in the heaven where all of the martyrs of Islam, they are jealous and they are envious. What kind of place he has. And on the day of Ashura, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas stood in front of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And from the beginning, he sought permission in order to go out into the battlefield. Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, do I have permission to go out into the battlefield? Every time he would ask Imam Hussein would turn to him, Sayyidi Aba al-Fadl, Aba al-Fadl, Anta hamilu liwa'i wal alamatu min ba'di. You are the one who holds my flag, you are my standard bearer. You are the protector of the daughters of Rasulullah. If you are to fall, if your standard, if your flag was to fall, who would protect them after me? Who would protect them after you? I cannot afford to lose you, Abu al-Fadl. Abu al-Fadl was persistent. He kept asking his brother. He kept seeking permission until Imam Hussein alayhi salam granted him permission. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas came to him and he said, Sayyidi, if you do not allow me to go out and fight into the battlefield, then at least give me permission to go and bring some water for the children. I cannot bear to hear the words al-atash, al-atash. The whole night he was hearing the words al-atash, al-atash, thirst, the thirst is killing us. Sukayna, Ruqayya, Ali al-Asghar at that time screaming from thirst. He says, I cannot bear to hear the daughters of Rasulullah screaming for thirst. For so many days they are thirsty under the hot plains of Karbala. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, with great sorrow and with great grief, he prepares his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. He says, In kana wala bud, if it must happen, then go out. I do not give you permission to engage the enemy. I only grant you permission to go out and bring water to my daughters, to your nieces, to your nephews, to your brothers, and to your cousins. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he rides onto the back of the horse and he goes out into the battlefield. Qamar Banu Hashim. So confrontational that those who saw him, they could not face him. They could not fight him face to face. عبست وجوه القوم خوف الموت والعباس فيهم ضاحك متبسم. The poet says that those who looked upon Abbas, their faces were frowned. The word Abbas in itself means the frowning. But he says the enemies of Abbas were the ones who were frowning, while Al-Abbas himself is smiling and he is laughing. عبست وجوه القوم خوف الموت والعباس فيهم ضاحك متبسم. He goes out into the battlefield towards the river of Alqamah in order to seek some water for the daughters of Rasulullah, for the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The enemy, they cannot face him. They cannot engage him in battle. They are too afraid. So what do? They all scatter. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas reaches the water. He reaches the river. Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when describing him, he says, كَانَ قَلْبْ عَمِّيَ الْعَبَّاسِ كَصَالِيَةِ الْجَمْرِ مِنَ الظَّمَى. He says, the heart, the insides of my uncle Al-Abbas were like a burning charcoal. He was burning on the inside out of thirst. And then he places his hands into the cold water and he feels the coolness of the water. Imagine a man who had not drank water for 3 days and he is burning on the inside, according to the Imam. He feels the coolness of the water. He feels the coldness of the water as he brings it up. And this is the meaning of love. This is the meaning of sacrifice and loyalty. As he brings the water close to his mouth, he remembers فَتَذَكَّرَ عَطَشَ الْحُسَيْنِ. He remembers the thirst of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He begins to speak to himself, يَا نَفْسُ مِنْ بَعْدِ الْحُسَيْنِ هُونِي وَبَعْدُهُ لَا كَانَ أَن تَكُونِي هَذَا الْحُسَيْنِ وَارِدَ الْمَنُونِ وَتَشْرَبِينَ الْبَارِدَ الْمَعِينِ. This is Hussein, he is dying of thirst. Ya nafs, O soul, how does your desire allow you to drink the cold water while your brother Hussein is dying of thirst? وَتَشْرَبِينَ بَارِدَ الْمَعِينِ هَيْهَاتْ مَا هَذَا فِعَالُ الدِّينِ وَمَا فِعَالُ الصَّادِقُ الْيَقِينِ وَمَا فِعَالُ الصَّادِقُ الْأَمِينِ. This is not the actions of Rasulullah. This is not the actions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. That we quench our own thirst when our own family is dying of thirst. At this point, he drops the water. Allahu Akbar. He drops the water, he leaves it back into the river, and he begins to fill the canteen with the water. And it is at this moment where the enemies of Imam Hussein begin to surround Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Again, none of them had the courage and the valiance to face him. face to face. They could not confront him. He mounts his horse and he is happy at this time. His mission is almost accomplished. He is about to deliver water to Imam Hussein. He is about to deliver water to Sukaina. He is about to deliver water to Ruqayya and the woman of Imam Hussein. It is at this point when he is heading back to the camp of Imam Hussein that one of the enemies comes out from behind a palm tree and he strikes him on his right arm. He severs his right arm. At this moment, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he turns to him. والله إن قطعتم يميني إني أحامي أبدا عن ديني وعن إمام صادق نهج النبي الصادق الأميني. He says that if you were to cut off my right arm, I would still defend my religion. And he begins to defend himself with his left arm. At this moment, another opponent, another enemy comes. They surround him. He strikes him on his left arm and his left arm is severed. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas has the canteen in his mouth, and as he is running towards the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they begin to rain down with him. They begin to rain down arrows on him. The arrow pierces the canteen. The water begins to fall. At this moment, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas is on the floor. One of the enemies comes and he strikes him on his head with the pole. At this moment, the blood of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas begins to gush. He cannot see his way. He cannot see his path. He cannot see in which direction he is going to. Imam Hussein alayhi salam runs out into the battlefield. When the opponents see Imam Hussein, they begin to scatter. He begins to call upon them. إلى أين تذهبون وقد قتلتم ابن والدي إلى أين تذهبون وقد كسرتم ظهري. He goes and he finds his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. At this moment, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas is overwhelmed. He does not know who is approaching them. He tells the person who is approaching them that I hold you accountable. I hold you accountable. If you do not allow me, if you take my life away, I only have one request from you. أقسم عليك بمن تعبد. I swear to you, I only have one request before my life passes, before I leave this world, is that you allow me to seek forgiveness from my brother Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Upon hearing this voice, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he identifies himself. He says, it is me, Ya Abu al-Fadl. It is me, your brother. I am the one who is here standing upon you. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he begins to apologize. Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, Sayyidi Ya Hussein, I am so embarrassed that I cannot bring the water back to you. What am I to do at this moment? Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he takes his brother's head and he puts it in his lap. أخي الآن انكسر ظهري وقلت حيلتي وشمت بي عدوي. My dear brother, it is now that my back has been broken. It is now that my enemy is rejoicing over me. He places the head on his lap. He begins to wipe the blood and the tears and the dirt off of his head. Every time he places the head of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas in his lap, Abu al-Fadl moves his head, he places it on the ground. He does this once, he does this a second time, he does this a third time. Imam Hussein tells him, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, I am trying to care for you. I am trying to take care of you. Why do you not want your head in my lap? He says, Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, Sayyidi Yabna Rasulullah, my head is in your lap and you are taking care of me right now. But who will place your head in their lap once the enemy has severed your head? إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Brothers and sisters, let us recite this dua 5 times. For those who are ill, for those who are sick, for those who are in need of our dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات. إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك قاضي الحاجات، إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. brothers and sisters, before I leave, I have one simple request of you. Tonight, the Muslim Youth in Motion, the organizers of this event and of many other events, are seeking to raise funds. And when we remember the tragedies of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the tragedies of the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we do so not only to shed our tears,